Josh, I have cracked the code.
The Harold Holt code? Fantastic. Finally we'll have a solid lead on the what of the conspiracy, even if the who and the why are still out of grip.
No. I've cracked the Ron code.
The Ron code, as in the L. Ron Hubbard code, the code that if we talk about it too loudly gets us sued and disappeared, and not necessarily in that order.
No, the Ron code. A code as old as the Canterbury Cathedral itself. A code that signifies much. It is, as the kids say, Ronorific.
Do the kids say that?
Your kids say that.
Now, just because one of my children made fart noises on this podcast, that's no reason to actually, now I think about it, it probably is reason to mention them. I need that audio for the respective 21st, actually.
We're off topic.
Given we're never really on topic, that means we're on the right track.
Track of what?
The Ron code.
Oh, you've heard of it.
Just that you've cracked it. So, what is the Ron code?
12.
Sorry?
12. The Ron code is 12.
Is this a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy joke?
Yes.
Does that make me vroom fondle or magic thighs?
I think you know.
I think our minds must be too highly trained, magic thighs. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy in Auckland, New Zealand. I am Josh Edison, and in Guangzhou, China, they are Dr. M.R.X. Dentith. This means nothing to our podcast listeners, but why are there pictures of cats and planets on the wall behind you?
Can you actually read what the poster says about the cat?
One of them says, "I still love you."
So you're missing the top, which is
well, which I can't see.
Old cat, I still love you. And the other one, it's not the end of the world. Not yet.
Right. It's just art, is it?
I think you know what it means, Josh. I think you know what it means. So. I know you're playing dumb for the audience of this podcast, who are not stupid people. So I think you should give them the respect that they deserve and acknowledge the message of those posters.
Fine, I will. This is all irrelevant, of course, but you should probably get used to that for this episode.
It's as relevant as what we're discussing this week, given that we made a promise in our last session.
I wouldn't call it a promise. A threat?
We suggested to one another it might be useful to look at a particular website, and having now looked at that particular website, I don't think it's been particularly useful.
We may have made a horrible mistake, but we're going to let that mistake play out for all of your benefits. Do we have any admin or anything before we get straight into it?
No.
Okay, well then let's get straight into it. Right, so, yes. As we said last time, our previous episode, we were talking about missing people, including Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt, who went for a swim in the 60s and never came back.
Sorry, Josh, that sounded like a euphemism. He went for a swim in the 60s. What's that meant to suggest?
During the decade referred to as the 1960s, he went for a swim in the ocean. How's that?
But you keep winking every time you say that.
I don't think I do.
And you keep nudging the air. He went for a swim in the 1960s. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more.
Well, that's a bit of it, isn't it? Because some people think, well, maybe there was more to it than that, including the person who runs the website harold-holt.net. Apparently it was just haroldholt.net, but he had to change it for reasons that we may or may not go into. And at the time, so last week when we mentioned this website exists, we thought, it's what you think of when you think of a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracist's website, and maybe it would be good of us to read it, and we could maybe spend an episode just looking around and going through it. It seems like there's enough content, and so I mean we're going to do that. We said we would, and we will. I think we're going to go through this website for as long as we can bear to, this may be a very short episode, maybe quite a long one.
Yeah,
I make no promises. Could be the longest one we've ever made.
I'm going to make a very interesting analogy now. This website is like the Warren Commission report.
Completely unstructured and nearly impossible to find information.
Absolutely unstructured, definitely. To the point where you go, well, surely the answer to this particular question will be located somewhere within its pages, and you can read and read and read and get 8 or 7 links deep into the website and go, this is not providing me an answer to the question of what happened in 1970 or 1971. So it's a very awkward website to talk about because there is a lot of content on it. And obviously, according to its author, there is some logic to its presentation. But that logic is not evident to the reader. There's a series of emails about the Australian Constitution, or more accurately, how the Australian Constitution no longer exists after the invocation of either 1970 or 1971. And the author of this website, are we going to use the author's name or just talk about them abstractly?
Maybe we should just say the author. I don't want to feel like we're naming and shaming.
Yeah, but there are a few news articles the author links to about his role in the assassination of Harold Holt, where he's named in the press. So that's kind of the odd thing about it. He links to, because he has... as the nature of this website indicates, to talk about some things, you must talk about other things. The reason why we're looking at this website is this person claims that the standard story about the death of Harold Holt, the disappearance of Harold Holt, is incorrect because he was one of the people responsible for the assassination and removal of the body after Harold Holt was killed by the Australian state. And there are some news stories which are basically of the kind, this man says he helped kill the Prime Minister, why is nobody investigating this? And he is named in those stories. So we can either use his name saying, well, his name is out in the press, or we can avoid using his name because otherwise he's going to come at us with his invocation about the second law of the universe.
Yes, I don't know. I think let's stick with the author unless it becomes unavoidable to mention his name.
So we'll circle back to the story about the death of Harold Holt. To go back to my original point, which once again reflects the nature of the website we're looking at. There are a series of emails about the lack of an Australian constitution due to the invocation of 1970 or 1971. He uses both dates. And which he says, look, it probably would be better to read the second reply before the first reply. So even the author is aware that the presentation of the material on this website is not necessarily conducive to an easy understanding of its meaning or intent.
No. So right near the top of it, one of the first things he announces at the top of the main page is, my Iran website and server are protected through my 1970 invoking of law of intent. And this comes up again and again, his 1970 or 1971 invoking of the law of intent. Other times he also talks about invoking the second law of the universe. I'm not
Which
sure
was invoked either in 1970 or 1971. There is a page about the second law of the universe, but it's simply a letter to then Prime Minister John Howard about the fact that the invocation has been made and how no authority now applies to the author of this website. If there is a story as to what the invocation is, or the exact text of the second law of the universe, it is buried so deep within this website, I have not been able to find it. But it seems that in 1970 or 1971, or it was invoked in 1970, which means that from 1971 onwards, the second law of the universe had been invoked. It seems that the author invoked the second law of the universe in order to show that everything is under the aegis of the creator, and that there are no temporal laws on Earth that apply anymore, i.e., all states, organizations, corporations, and the like no longer have any authority in the eyes of the creator. There's a lot of discussion of the creator in this, an awful lot.
Yes. So, I mean, as you say, it really is just all over the place. At the very top of the page, there are what appear to be categories with a few different links to different pages. There's news articles, there's scans of stuff, there's affidavits signed by this person, links to statutory declarations. There are 2 different letters to the to prime ministers informing them about this invocation of various laws.
Australia's had a lot of prime ministers, Josh. They've had actually more
That's
prime
true.
ministers than many Western countries have had, especially in the last few years.
But then immediately we have the thing about his Iran web server and the invoking of law intent, which is followed by the statement, the failure to defeat Lucifer's 5 eyes, Israel devil's game drags all to hell for eternity, which is a series of words that could be described as a sentence.
No, but it's followed up with, you ignored their idol of Satan on Australian soil that won't be ignored by my God's divine wrath.
And that sentence is a link which leads to a video stored on BitChute.
Yes, and I haven't watched all of the video, in part because it's mostly a montage with music. I have skimmed through it. It essentially is a series of images of Canberra from an aerial point of view, and then drawing lines upon that to show inverted crosses and Freemasonic shapes, on the notion that designed cities, particularly designed capitals, like, say, Canberra or Washington, D.C., really do look incredibly odd from the air and often have fairly unusual shapes. So you look at the big mile in Washington, D.C., the main area of operation of the government in Canberra, and you've got triangles and avenues and lines. And basically, you can draw a lot of interesting shapes. And if you want to find satanic images in those shapes, you sure can.
Yes. Now, that particular video that is linked to from the 3rd quote-unquote sentence on this website starts with a screen saying, intelligence agencies run and control the satanic agenda on Earth. Australia showed their Satan's script with their new Australian Parliament House with the image of their god, Satan, built into it. And this also corresponds to, yes, some pictures below it back on his main website where he says that the new Parliament building has the shape of an X on it, which it kind of does, and apparently the old Parliament building that one replaces shows the shape of a mechanical puppet. I don't know what that means.
Josh, you're missing out here on the name of the Australian Parliament House, at least according to this author. He claims the Australian Parliament House is called the Goat of Mendes.
Yes. Now, I should say that Five Eyes has shown up a couple of times yet. For those not aware, the Five Eyes Network is a what would you call it?
Joint security
initiative.
Australia, New Zealand, the US, the UK,
Canada,
and
is it Canada or is it someone else?
Yeah,
five countries.
It is Canada. It is the Five Eyes. It should be the 10 Eyes because each set of nations presumably has at least,
I don't know,
2 eyes.
Maybe a country only has 1 eye. Maybe that's why the eye in the pyramid on the American ones. Maybe every country is a pyramid with a single eye.
That's true. It is the eye in the sky.
Yeah. Anyway, Five Eyes Network is a real thing, and there's been various bits of controversy around it in this country and others. Do we like having the Americans having their spying apparatus in part in our country and things like that? So I assume there are similar.
It's quite
things
likely, given what's going on globally, that Five Eyes is going to be dead soon.
Well,
I can't really imagine some of those nations like Canada engaging in intelligence sharing with a country they're in a trade war with.
Yep. But so anyway, so the thread that I'm clinging to for dear life at this point is that, according to this guy, there's this sort of satanic conspiracy that has taken over the Australian government. Apparently, Australia is denying him the law of my God on Australian soil. And the reason why this is a bad thing is because the next paragraph says 13th July 2024. That date is a link which links to an archive.org archiving of this very web page. Don't know what's going on there, but it says that
because the web page has changed servers quite a number of times, and this might just be a archival link. Say, look, on this date, the 13th of July. I mean, it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell with the links on this website.
But anyway, I'm assuming I shouldn't assume anything. I'm assuming because this is at the top of the page, it's sort of an important bit.
Oh, Josh, you sweet summer child. You sweet summer child.
Anyway, but it is here. It is here. We can't deny that. And it says, the below shows no one had obtained my consent or my allowance to start a new game for Satan on Earth after 1970 that's controlled by Five Eye intelligence agencies violating my invoking fair law for violating what I hold. So this guy seems to think that because he invoked this law of intent in 1970, everyone now needs to ask him if they want to be evil Satanists and control the world, because they shouldn't be doing it, damn it.
Yes, in fact, there's actually quite a number of emails this person has sent to government and intelligence agencies, not just in Australia, but all around the world, reminding them of the 1970-1971 invocation of the second law of the universe, many of which appear throughout this front page of the website and appear on other pages. And most of the emails have been responded to with a very standard boilerplate, thank you for getting in contact with us. Your email is important to us. We will get to it when time permits, which the author of this website seems to be implying that A, the email has been recognized as received, and B, the fact there have been no subsequent replies or comments on the nature of the invocation means that these agencies and government recognize the invocation that occurred in 1970 or 1971, and thus are implicitly admitting that they are acting against the second law of the universe.
Indeed, this little bit then continues. The Bible script was defeated in 1970 and is why all agendas after 1970 invoking are null and void, as intelligence agencies and governments are accountable through my invoking after I, as a Navy diver, withdrew from the game after a clandestine act underage when they violated the authority
of Harold Holt.
Maybe?
No. That definitely is what he's referring to there.
I thought he might be referring to what comes up in a second, when they violated the authority of signed law, referred to as the authority of the gods document under the Commonwealth of Australia and its Constitution of 1901, when accountable for alien technology in me on Australian soil and on Earth, as shown by my CT scan on my website with all my affidavits of evidence I hold. It continues. CT scan on my Iran website ends alien plan of New World Order within my intent. All allowed themselves to be judged by accepting the authority of signed law and laws of creation in third dimension to continue on Earth after 1949 with the rule of law, international law and the UN Charter, and judged whether or not of creation's intended design on Earth after 1949. How do you know if you're having a stroke or not?
I mean, I don't. In fact, I assume that actually what's happening now is simply the delirium of death.
Or possibly this website is explainable by some sort of... Well, okay, no, almost, hang on. We're at the good bit now, because immediately below this there's now an image that says, my CT scan shows alien technology was placed in me when I was a Navy clearance diver, and all in third dimension will be accountable to creation for alien technology in me on Australian soil and here on Earth. And there is a reproduction of a X-ray or CT scan, I guess, of this guy's neck. I don't know what bit of it is meant to be the alien technology. Is it that little bit that's sticking out under his jaw? That looks a bit weird, but it's probably just his Well, you have the
Now,
little
Josh,
hyoid bone or something under there.
have you ever looked at an X-ray of anyone?
No. Oh, well, yes. I've had X-rays taken of myself. Yes. Not of it.
The thing about X-rays is that when you look at them without any training in radiography, you don't really know what you're looking at, and thus you can look at things within any body that has been X-rayed and suddenly go, that looks a bit weird, because most of us don't know what structures are inside us or other people. And there's no indication this person's ever seen an X-ray prior to the point of the alleged surgery that occurred to him when he was a Navy diver. Long story short, we might get there, we might not. It's hard to tell. But it does seem to be a case of this is the author, I've seen an X-ray of myself, I don't recognize what I'm looking at here, therefore it must be odd and unusual, therefore something has been put into me after surgery. Because I'm looking at this image going, like you, which is the bit we're meant to be focusing on here as being unusual? Because I see bone, I see muscle tissue, I see soft tissue and the like, but I'm not necessarily seeing anything which is evidence of alien technology. And
No.
I'm not even an expert on X-rays.
No. So I mean, we should probably stop just scrolling down this page and reading it all.
Well, no, except that.
But I do think the next bit is good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not just yet. We should stop, but not just yet.
Because the next bit ends up being, I have to put it, confounding. Because the next bit talks about how Australia has been engaging in genocide and ethnic cleansing with respect to their indigenous people. Now, this is an interesting point. Australia has engaged in cover-ups of the things it's done to its numerous indigenous peoples. Because when we talk about the people of Dreamtime, we're talking about a lot of different peoples. There's not one single Aboriginal people. There are many different indigenous nations within Australia. And so this bit initially starts off because, actually now he's talking about something which is actually real, which is the cover-up of the genocide and ethnic cleansing. The Australian state has engaged them, and then it swerves directly into COVID being a bioweapon.
Yes. It says the ethnic cleansing first started up when the British set up a convict colony in Australia in 1788, started their ethnic cleansing of Aborigines, the Constitution of 1901, and then Australia's government has already destroyed the Aborigines' God-given immune system with COVID bioweapon injection, along with poisoning the air, food and water when no one has ever had consent or allowance from creation's oldest race on Earth to be on their land with this evil game against creation. And I didn't mention that right up near the top of the page, there is also a link. COVID-19 does not exist, never isolated, a hoax to destroy humans' God-given immune systems, which links off to another one of those videos.
Yeah, and that's an old conspiracy theory of an unwarranted kind from the beginning of the pandemic, when it is true that when initial... Now, I'm probably going to get the biology completely wrong here. When initial tests were being done to locate COVID-19, there weren't stocks of the virus we were able to then do tests against. What we had were transcriptions of the virus in human hosts. So initial PCR tests were going against the transcriptions as opposed to comparing directly with a kind of quantifiable stock of the virus. So it's true at the beginning of the pandemic, COVID-19 hadn't been strictly isolated. We simply had the transcription of the virus via RNA. Now, of course, we actually have large quantities of the virus in stock all around the world to do our comparisons against. So it is true in the initial stages of the pandemic, we didn't have an isolated form of COVID-19. And some people have kind of fixated on that and never actually checked to see whether we isolated it later.
Yes. So
it's a lot like the Cox theorem stuff about how illnesses are meant to work, which deal with bacteriological illnesses as opposed to virological illnesses. There are certain people who have a very limited amount of medical knowledge without realizing how limited their medical knowledge is.
Yeah, and this that probably almost certainly definitely applies here. So yeah, I mean, as we go down that next, it's the myth of the UN creation of Israel, which involves British Zionism and Freemasons.
Anti-Semitism here.
A bit further down, Australia's government is null and void, no constitutional authority to govern for the last 49 years. So it seems like it's a bit of sovereign citizen stuff as well, although a particular kind of it, because he's a sovereign citizen because he invoked the law of the universe.
And not just that, he is the only sovereign citizen, because he states, you cannot transfer signed security laws regarding me. This means I am the only lawful person under the Commonwealth of Australia and its Constitution of 1901 on Australian soil, because the God's document, as Chris Bound states below, I have the God's document that's been signed and can never be undone. So not only is he a sovereign citizen, he is the one and the only sovereign citizen. He is the Akhenaten of Australia, the only conduit to God.
Also mentions that he was discharged from the Navy 5th November 1971, long before the Unlawful Act of 1973. So that's not the... Holt died in 68, didn't he? So that's an Unlawful Act must be something else. Is that when we... That links to another video. I'm not going to look at it now anyway.
Yeah, and 1973 is yet another date which appears on this website.
Here we go. Okay, so... maybe now we can actually start talking about the Harold Holt stuff, because a little bit further down below this, there's what a bit of text is actually highlighted, saying, referring to several of his affidavits, sworn affidavits that he's provided. One of them states
can we talk about the sworn affidavits for a second?
There are several.
Yeah. So before we get on to what's in the affidavit, I want to point out his reasoning as to how these affidavits work. So he has been in court, whether he's been summoned for a hearing or testified in front of an inquiry. And his reasoning is thus: if he gives a statement in court and that statement is not questioned by the opposition, so in this case the Crown, then he takes it that this affidavit has been accepted as fact by the court. So if you actually look at many of the stories he tells about affidavits on this website, he appears in court, he gives a statement, and the judiciary basically goes, yes, we have no questions about this, or this case is now adjourned. So there's no reading into the record of these statements. It's simply, in his view, if he makes a statement in court and no one questions that statement or raises issue with that statement, then that is an implicit acceptance of the factuality of that statement. So a lot rests upon these affidavits as being evidence positive, as opposed to, yeah, you just said something really weird there, and we're just going to move on.
We're just going to smile and smile and nod. But so yeah, I think we should look at the affidavits shortly. But what he says about this one on the main page is, in highlighted text, I was under the legal adult age of consent during the period when I was a Navy clearance diver involved in several clandestine acts, and I spent the next 30 years unable to spell, write, or talk with clarity, and yet able to comprehend everything I read. I have regained these lost abilities as time has gone on. Then there's a link to a video about transhumanism. Then it says, the 17th December 1967 was the murder of Australia's Prime Minister Harold Holt, who was murdered late Saturday night on the 16th of December 1967 and was reported missing around midday on Sunday the 17th of December 1967 while swimming. All nations and demons violate this God's document. I'm referring to my original signed law because I walked for law of intent in Lucifer's devil's game. All of the above shows the evidence I hold to have all accountable for the Creator's final judgment. And it gets into more, goes back to the weird devil stuff, but it does refer to Trump as the little bitch for the demon-controlled Five Eye, and says the Trump family are transgender sodomites. So, bit of transphobia. But anyway, I skipped past the Harold Holt stuff and back into the rest of it. Shall we talk about Harold Holt now?
Yes. Let us talk about
so I'm looking
on Harold Holt.
I'm looking at his statutory declaration from 2004. I don't know if you've looked at the earlier affidavits, but this one has a whole lot of introduction. Actually, has several screens.
So the first one is the 11th of November, 1999.
Yes, he has. I don't know. The 2004 one looked like it spelled things out quite nicely, but I don't know if they would say the same stuff.
Let's mention the 1999 one. So this is a scan of an administrative appeals tribunal in Brisbane, Queensland, between the author and the Department of Defence, where there was an affidavit given during a hearing against the Defence Department on the 13th of March 2000. So there was a hearing in March of 2000. The affidavit was given in November of 1999. Was once again a case of he gives a statement and then there is an adjournment where they inform the hearing that they have instructions from their client that he is not to be cross-examined on the affidavit or the evidence, and he was asked to leave the witness box once his evidence was finished. And basically the story he tells is that he was a Navy diver. He was admitted as a Navy diver under the age of consent for being a Navy diver. So you're meant to be 21 to have the particular role he had in the Navy at the time. According to his claim, the Navy got around this by basically giving him 2 ID cards, one with the correct age, one with the incorrect age. So basically they were fudging the books to allow him to take on a role he was too young to take on. He was injured during his work. He had surgery because of that work. Due to that surgery, he was unable to be a diver anymore. And so eventually he had an honourable discharge because he was unable to continue his particular duties as a diver. And the notes from the Department of Defence are the reason why he's no longer going to be in the Navy is that his passion for diving basically has been curtailed by surgical work that occurred to him. We're allowing him to be discharged from this role at this particular point in time. And then there's a whole bunch of talk about the surgery that was committed upon him was to put something in his throat.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at the other. I looked at this. I had to look through this one. I haven't looked at the other affidavits, and I suspect they all say something different because there's that. Then there's his stuff to the Attorney General. The one I was looking at was his dealings with Baden Pobjoy. Have you seen the talk of Baden Pobjoy? So this is a statutory. Okay, I mean, there's screens worth of stuff. Where he talks about the introduction of all of this before, and then eventually has like a photocopy, I guess, of the statutory declaration itself, which is him giving his declaration and then also giving a declaration about what Baden Pobjoy's declaration is, and a large part of it is him just trying to get this declaration out of the guy. So it starts off on the 22nd of March 2004. I sent a letter to the State Coroner of Victoria together with my Supreme Court affidavit and a CT scan showing photos showing objects in my throat. I asked for my name and documents to be registered for their inquiry into the disappearance of Harold Holt, as my documents detail my involvement with his disappearance. So then every paragraph is numbered, by the way. Paragraph number 2 talks about how, having done this, he took his coroner's letter and his CT scan photo, turned it into a 2-page letterbox flyer, and spent 5 months distributing 2,800 of these flyers around Brisbane. Then, in September of 2004, he receives a phone call from this guy called Baden Pobjoy regarding his flyer, and said that which had been given to him by a friend of his earlier that day. Mr. Baden says that he was on the beach the day that Harold Holt was reported missing and that Harold Holt was not there. Baden and his friend would dive there for abalone quite regularly, and they would see Harold Holt in his short-legged blue wetsuit with his two minders numerous times during those dives. However, on the Sunday in question, they only saw one person sitting up from the beach who was not wearing a wetsuit. Didn't know who this person was, but it was not Holt. This was around the time when Holt was to have disappeared while swimming there, which I think they're confusing him being declared missing with him actually going missing. Because just previously he went for the swim on the 16th, but on the 17th he was declared missing. And so he seems to think that the fact that no one was on the beach on the 17th is somehow suspicious, when you would think that if that was when he had been declared missing, you would expect him to not be on the beach because he was missing.
I mean, Josh, you use words to prove a logical point there, but your coherence is what makes your claim incoherent.
But at any rate, paragraph 5 says that, according to the author, Mr. Pobjoy said that he got in touch with state and federal police to give his account of what he had seen that forenoon, which is not a word I've ever seen before, but I like it. But they ignored him and his friend. A week later, his friend was killed in a car accident, and he, Baden, has been ignored ever since. He then stated that if Harold Holt was on the beach that morning, they would have seen him and been the first ones to be interviewed about his disappearance. Again, don't think they understand how disappearance is meant to work. Now, paragraphs 6 to 21 are basically the chronicle of this guy trying to get in touch with Baden Pobjoy to get him to sign a declaration. And it's just, he said, yep, I'll stand by that. I'll give you a declaration. I then gave him some of my flyers and asked him if he'd do it. And then he didn't. And then I went to him and said, are you going to sign the declaration? He said, yep, no, definitely, I'll do it. I just haven't signed it yet. It's done. And then he hadn't. And then I called him back again and he said, yeah, I've definitely got it. I just haven't got around to signing it. Sorry. And then I went and then I rang him again a couple of days later and he said, I've got no problems giving you my statutory declaration. The Holt's not there. I just haven't signed it yet. So just give me a couple more days. And then again, so this goes for 2 pages of him basically chronicling every single piece of communication he's had with this guy about trying to get him to do a statutory declaration and sign it. But eventually he meets up with this guy outside a police station. They get out, he meets him. Pobjoy hands his declaration over to the author and then sees he's in a hurry and has to go and drives off. I read his statement where it was now a complete turnaround to what he had been stating to me for the last 3 months regarding Harold Holt. So this statutory declaration apparently says, on the 17th of December 1967, I was on Cheviot Beach, Portsea, at approximately 8:30am to 10am for the purpose of scuba diving. I did notice a person on the beach in neck-to-knees wetsuit by himself. At a distance, I assumed it was the Prime Minister Harold Holt, before leaving the beach to refill my scuba tanks in Portsea. And then he rang him and says, why did you do a complete turnaround? And he says, yeah, you must have heard wrong. And I told him, no, you sold me out. I showed you my new flowers with the added paragraph about you, and at no time did you say anything different. And then I distributed 8,200 of these new flyers around Brisbane. And that's kind of it. It goes on. So the whole thing is the story of a guy contacts him, says he didn't see Harold Holt on the beach at the time, when I don't think he should have been able to see him, and then eventually when he signs a signed declaration says the exact opposite, and he was and the author wasn't very happy about it. And that is the story of the statutory declaration. Again, do you know if you're having a stroke, or is it something that just happens to you?
Sorry, Josh, I died 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, so I think I may have as well, and possibly we're now both in hell. How much more of this do we want to do? How much more have you got stomach for? What's interesting to you?
I guess we should probably also mention the fact that, along with the Harold Holt stuff, there's also the Brooke Brennan murder.
Okay, I haven't got to that bit yet. Tell me about the Brooke Brennan murder.
Well, so this is actually a very sad story here. So there was a 3-year-old who was basically killed by her mother's partner. And it seems, according to the author, I've been trying to actually verify whether this is factual or not, because one of my suspicions, given the way that he talks about the Harold Holt murder, is that there might be some degree of fabulation or fantasy in this person's mind. So one of the things which comes out by looking at the material on the Harold Holt stuff is that he only realized he was involved in the assassination of Harold Holt, who was assassinated due to his opposition to the Pine Gap US military base in Australia. He only realized he was involved in the assassination after the memory was recalled because he was brainwashed to forget about the event, which puts a little bit of a wrinkle into his story about being there, being witness to the event, and being one of the murderers or accessories to the murder of Harold Holt. He also claims that he was in remand for 6 months with the murderer of Brooke Brennan and wanted to testify about what he learned about this during those 6 months. But the police and the prosecution were in no way interested in what he had to say. Now, his theory is he was put into remand because he had been claimed to have made a grievous assault upon the mother of Brooke Brennan and had been put into remand with the supposed murderer of Brooke Brennan in order to get revenge on Brooke Brennan by killing the actual murderer himself, which he didn't do, and eventually was discharged from prison because there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge him with any form of assault. And once again, it's this whole thing where he has inserted himself into another story and claims he has information which is salient towards the unpacking of what really happened there, but essentially is more fixated upon the legal shenanigans that went on as opposed to actually telling us exactly what he knew. And that seems to be a kind of recurring theme throughout this website. This is someone who feels they've been hard done by the Australian state, which actually might be the case. The Australian state does, politicians in Australia talk about having battlers having to battle their way through what the Australian state does to them all the time. So maybe he has been hard done by the Australian state. But his fixation seems to be on what the state has done procedurally rather than talking about the fact of matters.
Yeah. Now, this is an interesting little bit of colour. I've just scrolled down and I found him talking about his CT scan and what he believes it shows. Did you see this? It's near at the bottom of the homepage under the heading, "So now I will explain further, knowing that you also know that I have their attention." He says, "First, a few quick points. My CT scan shows it all, but no one wants to comprehend. They only see the fillings in my teeth, not knowing I've still got the same teeth in my head at 61 years old, which shows they made sure they designed my teeth to be the distraction to the fools, because if you look at the jaw, it shows I have some sort of a structure there that's not bone and some sort of a structure there that's not muscle to control it. And there's numerous other things that's not worth explaining because the fools will only ever interpret through their own eyes." He continues, "Also, I have numerous bullet holes in me that defies logic. I have a bullet hole in the forehead, bullet holes in the chest, and a bullet hole in the temple that defies logic. My collarbone also defies logic, the way it's all been redesigned, and there's numerous other things I could talk about or show, but as with what I've mentioned, it shows the illusion of the reality that's here also." Page 27 of the... Okay, and he goes off into a story about how he apparently was diving in front of propellers of a ship and he's lost me completely. It goes off on a complete tangent. So apparently he reckons that shows there's something weird in his jaw. I mean, there's dark lines on his jaw, but who the hell knows what that is? He obviously thinks it's something alien and metal. I don't know. So I mean, there's a lot of stream of consciousness we see here, although it is organised into bits. Do you want to talk about the Chinese submarines?
But the bits and say it's all organised into bits, then the bits are scattered like a Dada-esque art piece across the internet itself. Yeah, let's talk about the China submarine.
That's on a separate page, at least.
And then we can end with his letter to the government, which I think is probably the best encapsulation of the style of reasoning that this website is an exemplar of. Yes, but yes, take me to his skepticism of the Chinese submarine hypothesis, which is one of those things I am also skeptical of the Chinese submarine hypothesis. But I suspect our skepticism comes from very different points of view.
Well, I mean, I don't even know. So yes, there was at the time when Harold Holt disappeared, the main controversy seemed to be, did he accidentally drown or was this suicide? But I don't know if even the suicide hypothesis was particularly seriously entertained. And then there were stories at the time that because he was a secret communist, being a left-wing prime minister, that he was actually some sort of a secret communist, and his disappearance was due to the fact that he actually swam out and was met by a Chinese submarine and taken back to China. Not back to China, since he was Australian, but taken off to China.
Well, no, back to China because he was a Chinese agent, I think was the implication at the time.
But yes.
So he would be going back to his real ideological homeland.
Yeah. This was mentioned at the time, and I don't think anyone took it particularly seriously. And apparently when Dame Zara Holt, Harold Holt's widow, first heard of the theory several years after his death, she said, "Harry, Chinese submarine, he didn't even like Chinese cooking," which is one of the more Australian things I think I've heard someone say. But so the Chinese submarine story gets its own page on this website, and it's basically because obviously he doesn't believe the Chinese submarine story because he thinks he killed Harold Holt and that this is all just a silly nonsense. But he does seem to think it's some sort of a, well, as he puts it, the Australian government official story was that Harold Holt drowned, but they soon helped to spread the whisper that Harold Holt was a Chinese spy and hightailed to China on a Chinese submarine, and for the next 38 years the Australian media were just too happy to dance to this tune for their masters. Has the Dame Zara story, and then says, it should be remembered not once during these 38 years did the Australian government or the Australian media ever try to debunk the story, nor did they ever call for an official inquest into his disappearance. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but yeah, nobody tried to debunk the story because I think everybody thought
it was ridiculous from the outset.
Yeah.
Now, once again, this is an example of him being concerned about a procedural issue, because the second half of this page on the Chinese submarine story isn't actually about the Chinese submarine story at all. It's the fact that the person who wrote the book on the disappearance of Harold Holt, one Tom Frame, never interviewed the author, despite the fact that the author sent his affidavits about being responsible for Harold Holt's death to the government and the media, and therefore Tom Frame should have been aware of this particular affidavit and thus should have interviewed him. So he's actually mostly pissed off by the fact that he doesn't get mentioned in a book about the death of Harold Holt, and certainly hasn't been picked out as an accomplice or the assassin of Harold Holt in the official narrative, such as it is, as to what happened to that particular Australian Prime Minister on that day at Cheviot Beach.
Yes, and then it follows with how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different reproductions of news articles from various websites, including The Guardian, The Age, a review.
One of which is about there's a new inquest on Harold Holt, which thus contradicts his claim there's been no inquest.
But what's interesting, so these articles do, I think that it seems the reason why he reproduces all of them is because they all reference the fact that the whole Chinese spy submarine thing was first introduced by a former Australian naval officer called Ronald Titcomb to a novelist called Anthony Gray. So, so for instance, the first article, which came from The Age, Australian news website from 2005, says, "The bizarre allegation that Holt was a Chinese spy was made to British writer Anthony Gray in 1983 by former Lieutenant Commander Ronald Titcomb, MBE. The previous year, Titcomb had been forced to resign as secretary of the Melbourne Club because he had not revealed his questionable financial history. Titcomb, who left the Navy under duress in 1968, contacted Gray claiming to know what happened to Holt after he disappeared into the surf off Cheviot Beach on December the 17th, 1967. So... yeah, that was an interesting wrinkle I wasn't aware of when we first talked about Harold Holt, the origin of the Chinese submarine story.
Did I mention in our last episode how there's not one but two short films about the disappearance of Harold Holt, fingering what really happened to the man?
That sounds familiar.
I know I mentioned it in the first time.
Yeah, I think the original.
At that time, there was only one short film called The Defector, where it turned out that yes, Harold Holt was defecting, but he was defecting back home to his alien masters.
Yes, I remember that.
It was an alien invasion story. Subsequent to that short film coming out, and after we made the first episode on mysterious disappearances, a second short film about the disappearance of Harold Holt was produced, but this time it's about time travel. Someone from the future comes back to eradicate Harold Holt to stop something to do with the Cold War. So there's a whole bunch of science fiction stories aiming to explain the mysterious disappearance and death of former Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt.
Well, how about that? Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap this up. What was the last thing you wanted to look at?
This is an email from Friday the 28th of January 2011. The subject is, "This letter is addressed to you, Mr. McClellan, as the highest law officer belonging to the Australian government in the land of Australia." And the text is such. "This letter is addressed to you, Mr. McClellan, as the highest law officer belonging to the Australian government in the land of Australia. Mr. McClellan, as the highest law officer, you are to inform the leader of the government to get in touch with the highest intelligence officer on Australian soil, who is to get in touch with those in authority, capital letter, regarding the authority I hold that all refers to the authority of the so-called God document. Now they are to inform this authority that I am to be brought before to explain, 1, why this authority has been violated through actions of those who are only subordinate to this authority, whereby their actions are interfering with me and those near me. 2, and why the authority, with its consequences of this document, is not applied to the person or persons who are violating it through their subordinate actions to this authority. 3, and why it has been allowed that I've endured 40 years violations to this authority when all other authorities are only subordinate to this authority. All should remember, and it should be noted, this authority cannot refuse my request for these explanations, as this action interferes with my action in play, which would allow the authority of creation to stop this action in play here on earth and throughout creation, which all other actions are connected to and subordinate to and its authority. And it should be noted, all actions that are put near me interfere with authority that I hold and also violate the authority I hold through the 1971 invoking of the second law of the universe, which has all accountable for a legal technology on earth and for violating creation. And this evidence I hold as shown by the CT scan of my throat, as shown on the Harold Holt website, that's invoked under the second law of the universe, in which any interference invoking this website violates this invoking and violates the authority that I hold that all other authorities are subordinate to, as stated above. Non-action regarding this letter with all the above is taken as a refusal to accept or acknowledge my request with its demands regarding this authority that I hold, which then automatically allows the next action to come into play. the authority of creation to end his authority in play, and all other actions connected to his authority. And I think it's very clear what's going on there.
You're having a stroke, yes.
I have to say, given the lack of punctuation and the fact that one of those paragraphs is just one very long run-on sentence, working out how to pass some of those sentences was itself a cognitive exercise.
And there's more of it where that came from, but no.
But not today.
No.
Not today.
So, I mean, if you think we're filthy liars or you want to experience this for yourself, you can go to harold-holt.net. I wouldn't recommend it. And frankly, I think we've probably just spent sort of about 50 minutes mocking a person's mental illness, but it is an interesting look at an actual sort of conspiracist website.
As you said at the very beginning of the episode, this is precisely what people think about when they use the pejorative term conspiracy theorist. This is the kind of thing that people think about when they talk about conspiracy theorists. It's what they think about when they think of the kind of people who either are David Icke or Alex Jones, or listeners to David Icke or Alex Jones. And as we've argued on this podcast, and I've argued at length in my academic writing, it's unfair and also not representative to assume that all conspiracy theorists look like the author of this website. But these people do exist. There are what seem to be irrational conspiracy theorists out there, which are lacking some degree of critical thinking. And thus, it is fascinating to investigate these particular kind of thinkers. It's just really important to remind people this is not the norm for conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy theorists are mostly like us. People like the author of this website are exceptional and extraordinary, and thus we shouldn't generalize from this particular style of reasoning to conspiracy theories more generally.
Yes. So actually there was a moral all along. So I think we're done. I think we're done with haroldholt.net. Maybe we'll check back in another 10 years and see how he's going. But
I wonder where the server will be located by then.
Could be anywhere, yeah. I'm tempted to wonder whether there will be in Iran in 10 years' time if the Trump government carries along the direction it's currently headed. But let's leave that to one side and wrap up this episode, and then go and record a bonus episode where we can talk about a bit of popular current television and a bit of
transphobia back home.
Transphobia, social media stuff going on. And I'm not going to be more detailed than that, because if you want to learn more, you'll have to listen to the bonus episode, and to do that, you'll have to be one of our patrons. And if you want to be a patron, and of course you do, because as we've exhaustively detailed in the past, patrons are just plain better than everyone else. And why would you not want that for yourself? So to get it, just go to patreon.com and look for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Sign yourself up. It's a piece of cake. There may be merch. Yeah. Maybe not. I don't know.
Don't go to harold-holt.net.
No, you cannot sign up. You have to be very clear. You cannot sign up as one of our patrons at harold-holt.net.
Yeah, you would be contravening the fourth law of the universe if you did so.
Exactly. So, I think we're done for another episode. Next time, we'll be talking about a book. But what book? You don't know, but you will if you listen in next time. But until then...
In fact, actually, next time, if you're a patron, we'll be talking about another book as well. So it'll be, for patrons, it's 2 books for the price of 1. Or actually, in this case, it's actually technically 4 books for the price of 1, because the book we're talking about, let's just say there are many different... Actually, it's kind of the Gravity Falls of books, because there are 3 versions of this text, and you need all 3 to unlock the portal of high weirdness. Something, something, Bill Cipher, something, something, Gravity Falls.
Yes. Anyway, we've said too much already. So I will bring this episode to a close. I still haven't come up with a perfect catchphrase, but I think based on our experiences with this episode, I'm going to go with see how this one works. I'm Josh Edison, and I think I'm having a stroke.
I'm going to make spaghetti with a baleen whale.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy features Josh Addison and Associate Professor M.R.X. Dentith. Our producers are a mysterious cabal of conspirators known as Tom, Philip, and another who is so mysterious that they remain anonymous. You can contact us electronically via podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or join our Patreon and get access to our Discord server. Or don't, I'm not your mum. And remember, groove is in the heart.